This week, we are talking about the unnatural outcomes caused by inequality when it comes to our health. And I think a very important basis for our discussions this week is the documentary Unnatural Causes. And I have assigned 4 episodes from this documentary. But I thought we could start our conversation just by looking at a global comparison. Some of the key indicators of health are listed here, such as life expectancy or infant mortality, teenage births, obesity, mental illness, and so on. And you'll see how these align with social and economic factors such as math and literacy, imprisonment, trust, as well as social mobility. So here we're largely interested in looking at the alignment of health and social problems with levels of income. And you see us very high up there in terms of inequality, but also therefore in terms of much worse health outcomes than many of these developed nations of the world. You can also see how this is largely determined by your income level. So if you have folks making very little income, only 37% reporting that they have very good or excellent health versus folks making above 80,000 reporting 71% of good or excellent. And I've assigned to you also just how it ranks for our own county, Contra Costa County, as well, in terms of health outcomes and a clustering of diseases such as asthma, cancer, or other respiratory illnesses. Also, the readings I assigned to you about the COVID-19 crisis will show you that there's a disproportionate impact on Black and Brown communities. Which neighborhoods are more likely to be polluted? So you can connect it also with environmental pollution, right? And you find again that not only Blacks and Latinx folks more affected, but in fact, even Asians are impacted more than white communities. And of course, it exacerbates lung diseases and heart conditions that exist, right? So anytime you have pollution, all of those things are amplified. Now, when we say inequality has an impact on your health, we're not just saying in terms of access to healthcare, which many of us have experienced in our personal lives, right? So it not only is just an academic issue, but many of us have been in that situation where we didn't have access to healthcare. We had conditional access. So when we think about social factors that determine health outcomes besides healthcare, we're talking about environmental hazards, communicable diseases, homicide, accidental death, smoking, lack of exercise, right? Not only because you may not even have the physical access to places to exercise. Sometimes folks working 2, 3 jobs don't have the time to exercise or don't live in communities that are safe for exercise. And in each of those cases, again, low-income folks are affected at a higher rate. Greater income inequality also causes worse health outcomes independent of its effects on poverty. And I want to explain that a little bit more. When you have greater inequality, you have a group of people who are able to, first of all, pass legislation which can put constraints on how we tax the very wealthy. And therefore, we don't have the resources to invest in social programs, any kind of social programs, whether they're programs for children, after school programs, to develop libraries and parks, all of these things that can lead to better health in the community. Preventative measures that can create a sense of community and prevent many negative health outcomes. The more inequality you have, the less incentive the very wealthy have to invest in these kinds of things. For instance, Jeff Bezos's kids or Bill Gates's kids are not going to go to the local library or go hang out at the park, right? They have their private movie halls, I suppose, and parks and libraries. And so this very wealthy group that has a concentration of resources is less and less incentivized to invest in the community. And so, in that sense, greater income inequality causes worse health outcomes, irrespective of poverty, right? So, poverty certainly means that you don't have access probably to nutrition, exercise, you have higher levels of stress, you don't have health insurance, all of those factors, yes. But I think the point that we're making here is that the more unequal things become, the less you'll see an investment in social programs, in programs that lead to better health outcomes for most of us in society. And also, of course, inequality or differences in status leads to higher stress, psychosocial factors. More and more, the research shows us these connections of psychosomatic factors leading to poorer health outcomes. If you have job insecurity, if you have very little options, then of course you're going to have higher levels of stress, and that will lead to poorer health outcomes. Now, the 4 episodes that I've assigned to you from Unnatural Causes, as I said, form the main fundamental basis for our analysis this week, and I'm hoping that you will align those with each of the readings. The first one, When the Bow Breaks, looks at birth outcomes that are affected because of racism, right? Chronic stress from cumulative racism, okay? And this lifetime of racism, not just during the 9 months of pregnancy, leads to premature births for Black women, right? And we see higher rates of infant mortality, but also low birth weight babies, right? And in fact, the movie compares the rates of white women, African women, and African American women. And the rates are pretty similar for white and African women, but much worse for African American women, right? And that's a really great way of challenging the argument that it has to do with genes. As we've been saying in this class, there's no genetic basis to race. So we're looking at this impact of chronic stress in terms of worse birth. And if you look at infant mortality rates and disaggregate by race, you start to look at the impact much worse for African Americans. And then you see the outcomes just for comparison for white communities, Asian American communities, and then Latinx. Then you have the episode Place Matters, where literally your life expectancy is determined by your zip code, right? We were just talking about this in terms of built space, social environment, how that impacts your health, and the neighborhood conditions in terms of whether you can make healthy choices. You know about the idea of food deserts, for instance. We have one right here in Central Valley where folks growing our produce cannot afford to buy it, right? Another documentary I always recommend is Food Inc. because Food Inc. gets really deep into why is it that our produce costs so much? Where are the agricultural subsidies going, right? And why is it that cheeseburgers cost less than the salad, right? And so, as you're thinking about health outcomes as sociologists, you need to make those connections with political institutions as well as other factors like lobby groups and why we call ourselves a corporate oligarchy, right? So, Place Matters, I like that episode also because it's very hopeful in terms of giving you examples of community organizing and how folks from the community can really make an impact in terms of creating an environment or conditions where everyone can thrive and you can have little farmers markets. Know of this guy in Oakland who's literally started growing food on the sidewalk for folks who don't have a backyard, right? So it's always good to think of how we do have agency and some amount of control over our environment. They show this also with the kids who live in very dangerous neighborhoods and how they need to gain this sense of control, right? And that already can lead to better health than thinking about how you might not live to be 20 years old, right? All of these factors then affect health outcomes, what kind of housing and schools you have, environmental hazards, violence and crime in your neighborhood, whether you have the opportunity for social interaction, whether you have healthy food choices or places to exercise. The other episode we had was Bad Sugar that looks at very high rates of type 2 diabetes in native communities. Often, again, we use the blaming the victim model by looking at native foods such as fried bread without realizing that that was an adaptation to federal food aid that was provided. We take their water away and then they start dying of starvation. And then we decide, oh, this makes us look bad, so let's give them food aid. But of course, we provide them the wrong kind of food aid, which is lard and starch. And within a few decades, you start to see insanely high rates of diabetes within these communities, right? And so now community leaders are pointing out that it's both in terms of access to nutrition, but also the hopelessness in these communities. And you see this commonality in many, many folks throughout the world, native people who have been dispossessed of their land and language and identity. Right? You see this in the Aboriginals in Australia, First Nation folks in Canada, who have high rates of depression, alcoholism, as well as diabetes. Right? The final episode was on becoming American that looks at what is called the Latino Paradox, which is that Mexican immigrants recently arrived who are typically poorer tend to have better health than some of the wealthiest Americans. The longer they live here, the worse their relative health becomes, right? So when they're coming here first, not only do they have a practice of eating healthier, more native foods, but they have very close kinship ties, right? So those kinship ties are very good in terms of offering a buffer against poverty, against racism, etc. But unfortunately, the longer they live here, the worse their health outcomes become, which is kind of counterintuitive because we have a tendency to think that, oh, they're coming from developing nation to developed, they'll be better off, and so on. But in this one aspect, it seems like we need to replicate some of the community building aspects or knowledge of native foods or even lifestyle. And of course, it's very hard to combat poverty, right? Or working 2 or 3 jobs and not having the time to eat healthier and live a healthier life.